Why Media Group? The fastest growing media group in North America.
Hello and welcome to Y Media Newsroom. I'm Ramona Singh, and today there's an announcement that we saw take place just the last few days, and it's pretty big because as we're in the renegotiations for CUSMA, scheduled date is July 1st, and it looks like it's not going so well. And the United States has been asking for concessions from Canada before their review on July 1st. And we know we've gone into much detail about if Canada is not able to meet its review challenges with the United States and Mexico by July 1st, then it would trigger a clause of an annual review. But if it does come to terms with it, then it's going to secure CUSMA for another 16 years. And that means we're talking about $1 trillion economy between the United States, Canada, and Mexico when it comes to exports. 70% of Canadian exports go to the United States. We're talking about $3.5 billion that cross the border between the two countries. And here you have it at now, one of the concessions that it seems appears that Canada's making is that the federal government has now ordered the CRTC to rethink one of its most controversial parts of Canada's Online Streaming Act after concerns about higher consumer costs when it comes to this trade tensions with the United States. Well, what are these streaming services? They're all American companies like Netflix, Disney Plus, Spotify, Amazon Prime Video, and essentially this increased amount that it was going to charge the streamers. Well, the criticism came back that these streamers like Netflix will pass that on to the consumers. And that, of course, also created a situation with the US administration. So now this comes at a time where you have, Prime Minister Mark Carney reversing some of these policies to make sure that's going to position itself well when it comes to having this massive review with the United States. Now, the Online Streaming Act that was passed in 2023 was designed to modernize Canada's broadcasting rules by requiring foreign streaming platforms to contribute financially to Canadian content. So this was like a traditional broadcasters have done for decades, right? So in May of this year, the CRTC ruled that a large foreign streaming service would have to contribute about 15% of their Canadian revenues towards Canadian programming, up from the earlier 5% contribution model, essentially saying, you know what, you have your Netflix, you're here in Canada, you have this many million subscribers by Canadians, and for that, well, essentially that means that, you should be able to put 15% of that towards Canadian revenues for Canadian programming, right? Pick up some Canadian programs that are available, and therefore it will bring money into those, Canadian companies that are producing content, right? This is up from the 5% contribution model before. And then to which the critics said that, hey, that 15% is just going to be an increased bill. So if you're paying, whether you're paying $7.99 for Netflix or $19.99, well, that 15% is going to be added on to that existing monthly amount. So now the decision immediately triggered opposition from the United States, right? These are American streaming companies, and this is, if you can imagine, Hollywood's lobbying group, right? And that came back. So now you have Culture Minister Mark Miller has now directed CRTC to review its recent streaming decision and propose the proposal increase of streaming contributions from 5% to 15% of Canadian revenues to kind of take a look at that. In other words, we're hearing that they're going to pull it back, saying that it's not necessary. And to that, you have Ottawa arguing that the higher costs could ultimately be passed on to Canadian consumers through increased subscription fees. So now what the government is doing is they're announcing a $600 million support package for Canada's cultural and broadcasting sector instead, saying, you know what, we're not going to require, the likes of Disney Plus or Netflix or any of those foreign streaming giants to essentially go from 5% to 15% when it comes to Canadian content. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create this fund of $600 million to support Canadian content creators to be able to promote Canadian culture and Canadian content. So now the United States, essentially their government and Motion Pictures Association did criticize this initial decision and the law being, pushed back. This is a critical time. You don't want to be able to upset any of them during a CUSMA review that's taking place right now. So that's the latest when it comes to Canadian content, as the funding under the broadcasting system currently exceeds about $2 billion annually. Now you have this $600 million federal investment that's going towards Canada's cultural sector. So this matters because, you have this intersection of culture, affordability, and trade. Supporters of the Online Streaming Act argue that the foreign streaming giant profit from Canadian audiences, right? They're taking revenues monthly from Canadian audiences, millions at a time, where Canadians will have multiple platforms, whether they're subscribers of Netflix, and Prime and so on and forth. So this is a way to be able to fund some of those Canadian stories. What's particular is Indigenous programming and local news and French language content. Critics argue that the policy functions as Netflix tax, and therefore they said, you know what, we're going to do it differently this time and make sure that there's a fund for Canadian content with this $600 million package. Of course, it's government funded, and that is where things are at right now. Our next thing we're going to look at is we've been covering this entire thing when it comes to this separatist movement in Alberta. And, we've seen so much happen online. We've seen so much when it comes to Premier Smith and her position on the referendum that she has scheduled for October 19th. Well, to this is coming at a time where you have four former Conservative MPs who are now publicly backing Alberta's separation. Why is this so important? Well, because you have Alberta as the heartland of Conservative land, right? Majority of the MPs that are in Alberta are Conservative. And when you have four of former Conservative MPs publicly backing Alberta separation, that is a game changer, right? So this is happening at a time where you have frustrations in the parts of the province in Alberta over federal policies when it comes to equalization payments. What is that? That's, Alberta paying equalization payments to Canada for the Canadian Federation, for the provinces that don't have the same type of revenues to be able to support them. And then you had all of the, what Alberta called at the time of Prime Minister Trudeau reign as anti, oil pipeline laws. And so you have that frustration there. You have parts of the province when it comes, the frustration over federal policies, equalization, energy regulations when it comes to climate change policies, and what Albertans see as a lack of political influence in Ottawa. Even though they're sending all their MPs, they're saying, we've now been with the Liberal government since 2015, and we don't feel like Ottawa is listening to us. So now what's happening is Alberta separatism has historically been a fringe movement, right? Meaning that it was small, it was minor, the feelings were there, but majority of Albertans didn't want to separate. And then you had this massive thing take place where you had 301,000 signatures being pushed forward of people who want to separate from Alberta. And that was blocked by the courts because of Indigenous, rights in terms of their land treaty rights with Canada that predates Alberta. But you have at the same time where, Premier Daniel Smith is now having a referendum on what people are calling a referendum on a referendum to be able to proceed on this separatist movement. So now this is very critical because you have former MPs that have said that they have interests in Alberta that they think that it needs to go to the separatist movement. So the fourth picture that you're seeing there are four former Conservative MPs who've publicly endorsed Alberta's independence, Alberta separating from the rest of Canada. And those are MPs Jay Hill, former MPs Jay Hill, Leon Benoit, Val Meredith, and Alan Carpan. The movement remains separate from official position of the Conservative Party because under Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, the leader of the official opposition, he's saying no. He wants Alberta to remain in Canada. He believes that policies in Ottawa should change, but not Alberta become its own country, right? So they're going to have their own movement. And now Pierre Poilievre is an Alberta area MP. If you recall, he lost his seat in Ontario in the outer skirts of Ottawa riding, which he had for 20 years. He lost in the general election last year, and then he was able to go into a by-election and get into the House of Commons as an MP in an Alberta area riding. You have Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has repeatedly stated that she supports Alberta remaining in Canada while pushing for greater provincial autonomy. And separatists argue that Alberta contributes disproportionately to federal revenues while lacking influence over national policy decisions. They're saying we're giving the money to Canada in our equalization payments. We pay a significant amount because they're the oil capital and of Canada. And they're saying, but yet you don't listen to us. We pay the money, yet we feel like we don't have a seat at the table. We send conservative MPs, yet we feel like we don't have a seat at the table. So recent polling has generally shown support for Alberta separation around 20 to 30% range, depending on the questions and political circumstances. But a recent poll cited in Alberta's political discussion found approximately 29% support for separation, while a clear majority prefer remaining in Canada. Alberta remains Canada's largest oil producing province, accounting for roughly 80% of Canada's crude oil production, making energy policy central to the debate because that's their economy. That is what they do. So this is very significant because it's showing a separatist sentiment is no longer confined to fringes, like small, political organizations, but now it's when you have formal federal MPs who are stepping up who used to be in Parliament representing Canada, right? The Canadian Constitution, are now openly advocating for independence. It goes to show where this movement has gone and how much it's grown and how visible it is and how credible it's become with some of these people who were Canadian officials who are now saying, no, we support this movement. And if so, does that mean if in a scenario, if the referendum's held on a referendum and then Alberta continues, what are we looking at? Are we looking at these future politicians of Alberta as a separate sovereign state? There needs to be so much before that even happens. But what this is showing is that this is growing. The sentiment is growing. Regardless of what Ottawa is doing right now under Prime Minister Mark Carney, the sentiment is still there. And that puts position of Premier Danielle Smith in a very hard situation because she's the one who lowered the threshold for the petition, right? Saying it should be 178,000 people if they sign for it, then we'll trigger a referendum vote to that, which was, exceeded to 301,000. It was blocked, but now she has scheduled a referendum. Now, another interesting thing is that a CBC investigation has found that some of Facebook pages and accounts that are promoting Alberta separation appear to be operated by individuals located outside of Canada, raising fresh concerns about foreign influence and online manipulation surrounding the province's separatist movement. The report is also suggesting that overseas operators have been creating and amplifying content designed to increase political polarization and to create things as, making it unstable in Canada when it comes to the separatist movement and support for Alberta's independence. This is very significant because this momentum has really gained for the separatist movement since 2025. When there was tensions over federal energy policies, equalization payments, what they called Western alienation. So this is critical because when you see what's happening, if these Facebook accounts that are promoting Alberta's separation, if they're coming from outside of Canada, that means there's foreign influence taking place in Canada. So earlier reports found networks of YouTube channels promoting Alberta's separation and US annexation narratives linked to operators in Europe. Very significant. Researchers say that foreign operations can use social media to amplify existing political divisions rather than create new ones. And we've seen that take place in election time, right? We saw that take place. Remember about in the election in Donald Trump's first election with Hillary Clinton and what the whole investigation showed in terms of Russian influence And so, we've seen this a lot when it comes to foreign interference, but especially during an election. This is now happening to create, a lot of concerns because the security experts warn that foreign disinformation campaigns often target emotionally charged individuals because of emotionally charged issues. And when it comes to separatism, immigration, national identity, that can actually amplify this entire thing. So you have Alberta's voter database, right? That was released, 2.9 million voters on that. If you recall, this is Elections Alberta saying that there was no breach on their side, but that information that went to some of these organizers, it was leaked online. And to that, this is very critical what's happening in Alberta, what's taking form, and this is a developing story. Of course, we're gonna keep up with it and see where this evolves to. We're gonna take a quick break, and we'll be right back.